Good morning, distinguished guests, young professionals, students. It's for me a great pleasure to be here today moderating this panel session about one of the most important topics for the future in the industry. Climate change policies have the power to shape the future of our industry, and we, young professionals and students, are the future. My name is Laura García Chiquero, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Young Professionals Committee. And today, we will be sharing, during 90 minutes, the perspective of how oil and gas companies are contributing to that challenge. The challenge that means that we have to continue offering energy to an increasing population while we lower our CO2 emissions. In fact, we know that 2/3 of the CO2 emissions are energy-related. This is why the oil and gas companies are in the center of the solution. And during the next 90 minutes, we will see how oil and gas companies, far from escaping from this obligation, they are really embracing that and putting solutions on the table. And it's a reality that now, most of the oil and gas companies, they have emission reduction objectives in their KPIs. So I would like to hear today which are the different roles on how oil and gas companies are evolving and they are transforming to address this challenge. But also, I think it's really important to remark that still we have people without access to electricity or to energy. And also, we have people that has higher living standards, and everybody wants to have a better way of living. And this is the great challenge that we will have to address while lowering our emissions. So we will start with Piers Rimmer, that he is the General Director of the WPC, but he is also the chair of the Energy Access Platform that can give us a really good overview on this challenge. Thank you. Thank you. Please.
Well, good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. I was just going to start with a basic point, is to ask you all whether you believe in electricity. And I know that's a stupid question to ask, because everybody does believe in electricity, but you can ask the same question about climate change. And there are still people out there that don't believe in climate change. I think we all do, and the scientific evidence is clear that we have climate change that is induced by the human population, and we have to do something about it. As I actually said earlier, one of the main issues is world population, that by 2050 we'll have 10 billion people on the planet. Now, it will probably be more than that, because 10 billion is the mean number from the UN statistics. So hopefully there'll be less people, but we're likely to have more people on the planet. And these people, sorry, that last slide should have shown you that the large part of the growing population is going to be in India and China. Both those countries have large deposits of coal, which is unrealistic to think that they won't use. So one of the challenges there is to use fossil fuels in a clean and sustainable manner. We also know that we're going to be using fossil fuels for many years to come as well. We do a meta-analysis at WPC. We don't do our own analysis. We look at the IEA, we look at OPEC, we look at what all the countries and companies are saying the future is going to be, and we try and take a realistic view. We also know as a fact that the global average temperature has been rising for some time, and also that the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere has been rising for some time. And the little box at the bottom there shows you all the COP meetings of when we started talking about all this. And it's got more serious in recent years, because the rate of CO2 rise has been a lot faster in recent years than it has been historically. So as far as our industry is concerned, we need investment, and we run out of production capacity without investment, whatever we do has to be socially and environmentally acceptable, and this means a significantly lower carbon footprint. So how do we do this in a responsible manner? Well, we have a toolbox for mitigating climate change. The low-hanging fruit, the obvious one, is energy efficiency. We can switch fuels, we can switch away from coal, we can switch away from oil for power generation and look at natural gas, we can look at biomass. Obviously, renewables, we can look at nuclear, but again, nuclear has its own long-term problems with nuclear waste and nuclear storage. Now, we've been talking about this for a very long time, and industry has been involved with this for a very long time. I put this picture up to show that I did once have hair. This is at COP1. This is in 1995. I was talking at COP1, and bear in mind how long ago this is, that as an industry, we are venting as much methane, venting, flaring and leaking as much methane as Europe uses a year. And we were promoting carbon dioxide capture and storage. In those days, it's such a long time ago, we called it CO2 disposal, but we talk about it in a more friendly manner now. And carbon capture and storage is vital if we're going to carry on using fossil fuels into the future. There are many possibilities for carbon dioxide utilisation in the oil and gas industry for enhanced EOR, the same with the coal industry for enhanced coal bed methane production for CO2 storage. I put up this picture, again, you've probably all seen it before, but again, this is one of the original charts that we used in 1995. One of the leaders in this in the early days was Equinor. They were then called Statoil, and particularly with the Schleipner project, which actually started in earnest a year after COP1 in 1996, and really showed what the oil and gas industry was capable of, but also what the oil and gas industry was capable of incentives, and particularly with the Norwegian government with the potential for carbon taxes, how this could be costed and operated. There are many activities now all around the world looking at enhanced coal bed methane, enhanced gas recovery, enhanced oil recovery, and looking at ways of storing CO2 in depleted wells and in aquifers, as the Norwegians have been doing for over 25 years now, at over 1 million tonnes a year for the last 25 years. We also have to look at methane emissions. As I said at COP1, we were talking about the amount of methane that we emit and that we flare. And at COP21, we were still talking about the amount of methane that we emit and that we flare. We have lots of possible options, as well as using our fossil fuels more efficiently. We can look at the biological processes and the biological routes to chemicals and to fuels. As was raised in the previous sessions, again, there are competing issues here for water and food usage. And there are many innovative schemes from oil and gas companies looking at using CO2 to enhance algae production. And in the case of the absorption towers, you can see they're directly taking CO2 from power stations for algae production. We also have a situation where we have people with no access to energy, no access to clean cooking, and as I mentioned in the previous session, all the people that die every year because of this. As an industry, we accept that climate change is an issue. We were all at COP21. We were there as WPC. We're an affiliated organisation to the UNFCCC. We're promoting access to energy and the industry responses for reducing natural gas leakage, for the World Bank Gas Flaring Initiative, for the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, for all the UK and Australian and other CCUS initiatives. We know that innovation and technology is a key, energy efficiency is a key, but we also need policy instruments to help us achieve this. Many years ago, we solved the acid rain problem by scientific innovation and by pricing sulfur. And I think we can solve a climate problem by scientific innovation, albeit on a more enormous scale than the sulfur problem, but also by pricing carbon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Piers, for this interesting presentation. But I would like to ask you, because looking at your presentation, I'm really curious about COP1 and what's happening between COP1 and COP21. How do you see like the involvement?
It's quite interesting that as an industry, we have been involved in all this from way before COP1. And I know some companies get some bad press about this. I can remember speaking and working with Brian Flannery from Exxon in the late 80s, looking at carbon dioxide capture and storage. We were trying to promote this at COP1. Nobody was particularly interested. We had, I think, the Indonesian minister and the Italian minister raised it at COP1, and nobody else did. They thought the solutions were renewables. The rest of the audience didn't think there was a problem at all. And the nuclear industry was very good at lobbying. And over the years, again, our industry was involved in all the SBSTA meetings, all the scientific meetings leading up to all the different IPCC reviews and reports over the years. And as time went on, people started to take this more seriously. We had a World Bank program in 1997-98 to reduce methane flaring, which again was successful to start with, but then sort of fizzled out. So we are hoping that with COP21 and all the initiatives now that we will get back on track. As an industry, we've been involved since the beginning, but the pace needs to quicken up now.
Thank you very much. In fact, I didn't know that we were like a little bit like outside in COP1, and it's good to know like we have been like evolving and people is realizing how we have a central role to solve this challenge. So let's continue with Gerardo Uría. He is the Senior Director of Membership and Industrial Relations of the American Petroleum Industry. Welcome him.
Thank you, Laura. And Daberdeen, good afternoon, everybody. Before I start, I would like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to speak here today, but I also want to congratulate the committee for such a wonderful event. Very well done. Congratulations. As you know, climate change is a very complex topic, so I will try to address it the best way I can. Caveat, these are my opinions, and it coincides with probably other organizations as well. So today I'm going to have a couple of points to make. The first one, obviously, climate change and energy, then things that we've heard this morning, things that pretty much everybody knows, the relationship with the growing energy demands. Then I want to talk a little bit about API and one of our initiatives that we're doing in the United States called the Environmental Partnership. And then I'd like to challenge the next generation, the new generation, on the way forward. We know that climate change is real and very complex, but extreme agendas like abruptly cutting access to fossil fuels is unrealistic. We also have to deal with political and social trends that are in conflict with energy needs, but we cannot forget the importance of all the activities that our companies, the oil and gas companies, are undertaking to come up with solutions to create sustainable environmental ways for generating energy. We've seen this slide before, but I did want to make reference to it. Currently, we consume we have reached about 100 million barrels a day of consumption. That's more than double what it was 50 years ago. Now, as you can see, in 2040, demand is expected to grow, and that demand, as Piers pointed out, and others this morning, will be mainly from emerging economies. But it is everybody's duty to address those needs, and as an industry, we need to do that. We've seen this slide before as well, so I won't make much reference to it. These were from last year, in 2018, the various different outlooks, either by IEA or by different companies. But reality, what I want to point out here is that those projections, even under different scenarios, where optimistic scenarios for renewables, tell us that we'll continue to utilize oil and gas for many years to come. I reviewed newer scenarios that just came out over the last couple of weeks. Various companies have put out their outlooks into 2050. And the new scenarios the new outlooks, are not much different. As a matter of fact, the latest numbers, in 2050, we will be utilizing somewhere between 52 and 118 million barrels of oil a day. And in 2050, we'll also need about 9 to 13 billion cubic meters of gas. The point here is, as everybody pointed out, is that oil and gas, will continue to utilize oil and gas for many years to come. In the United States, thanks to the use of thanks to the use of natural gas, we have been able to lower the emission of greenhouse gases over the last century. While doing this, beyond producing natural gas cleaner and safer than before, we are also investing billions of dollars into the development of zero or low carbon technologies. That's our industry. Our industry alone in the United States has invested in these newer technologies more than all other industries combined. From 2000 to 2016, the U.S. oil and gas industry has invested $108 billion on these zero to low carbon technologies. In addition to that, we continue to invest in alternatives, in conservation, and cleaner fuels. As everybody mentioned, renewables are still going to be needed. However, we need to make big investments in order to be able to develop those new technologies. In the meantime, some of the technologies that were discussed earlier today, CCUS, will need to be further developed. The one thing that we have to address is the general public perception. In talking to young generation, the next generation, general public in the US has the opinion that we should develop alternatives compared to fossil fuels. The ratio is 65 to 27%, something like that. I know that adds up to not 100, but that's because there's not a good understanding of what we really need. So we need to do more as an industry, as a society, to be able to collaborate on all these efforts. I do want to talk a little bit about API. Some of you saw this slide this morning. I won't repeat what my colleague Deborah said, but I do want to remind everybody that API is a trade association that is based in Washington, D.C. The reason I wanted to put out this, to talk a little bit about API is because when I was in college, the first thing I learned was the API gravity, but I didn't know anything else. I had no clue what API did. It wasn't until actually I went to API to work that I learned a little bit more about API. We do a lot of things in the United States, but we also operate globally as it relates to our standards, certification, training programs. But the one thing that we do is that we collaborate, especially more recently, with other organizations, such as the WPC, such as the International Oil and Gas Producers, or IPCA, and that's in order to promote affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. You also saw this slide if you were here this morning. I do want to point out that our members are global. You'll recognize many of these companies. And the API represents the entire industry value chain, from the exploration and production to transportation, not only of the crude, but of the refined product, refining, of course, and then the service supply sector. We have over 600 members, and they all operate globally. They all adhere to certain requirements, and most of them also implement API standards. By the way, they also contribute through their volunteers in the development of those best practices around the world. The API and our members recognize that industrial activity increases the risk of climate change, so we are committed to doing something about it. We believe that the oil and gas industry has the opportunity to drive the energy sector forward, not by abandoning oil and gas, but by embracing stricter environmental practices and developing emission reduction technologies. So to that point, I want to talk about the environmental partnership. The environmental partnership is an initiative that we started that it has three basic principles: is to learn, collaborate, and take action. As you know, from the shale revolution in the United States, we have drilled literally millions of wells across the US. So the purpose of this initiative was to utilizing EPA data to come up with a few things so we can study what is the impact of those things, what can we do about it, and it specifically relates to methane emissions of VOCs. And we picked three things. We determined, or the EPA data told us, that 57% of methane emissions from gas well operations came from pneumatic controller, high-bleed pneumatic controllers. So one of the initiatives is to monitor these controllers, replace them, remove them, or retrofit them so we can reduce methane emissions. The next one was the manual liquid unloading program. And here we're developing best practices to minimize the emissions during the removal of liquids from gas wells. And the third one is a leak detection program using technologies like LDAR, drones, high resolution cameras to detect methane emissions and be able to address the issues promptly, and that way help reduce emissions. Now, we're not doing this by ourselves. This is a collaborative effort. We started with 26 companies, and currently we have over 60 companies involved. And you recognize some names there. Others are independent operators in the United States. But it's not only them. We're also working with academia, the government, and local stakeholders. So everybody's involved in this. We started this project in 2018. And since then, we have reviewed 78,000 well sites. Remember now, some well sites have multiple wells, so it's definitely more than that as far as number of wells, and 56 million components of those wells. So, as I mentioned earlier, the purpose is to learn, collaborate, and to take action. So we also hold workshops where we share best practices from the big operators to the small operators, so that's beneficial to the entire industry in the United States. And we're trying to recommend this type of practices to other sites around the world. I do want to talk a little bit about other technologies. My colleague Deborah mentioned some of them this morning, but these contribute to the early detection of potential emissions. One of them is the use of smart pigs. And the reason we wanted to talk about some of these other technologies is because we tend to talk about E&P operations. Well, there are emissions in pipeline, and certainly in downstream and in other aspects of the industry. These smart pigs are high technology and that are able to detect cracks and monitor potential cracks in pipelines, therefore allowing us to make repairs promptly. We're also using drones, not only for pipeline, but also in refineries, in natural gas operators. Pierce mentioned flaring. We're using more and more of those technologies. Yesterday in the innovation session, it was mentioned that we have to integrate these technologies. And the industry is doing more and more of that. But we need to continue enhancing those technologies. Our companies are also developing renewables. Our members are investing in hundreds of millions of dollars in solar and wind energy capacity, not only in the United States, but across the globe. And we're also developing new fuels, cleaner fuels. So what's the way forward in order to continue to develop and provide affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy to the world? We need the future leaders to help us with that. The example that I have here is for onshore operations. So we have harnessed the technology to reduce the surface footprint by up to 90% and drive reductions on methane. This is for onshore operations, but we can do much more for other operations as well. And the long-held assumption that we cannot increase energy production, grow the economy, and decrease emissions all at the same time no longer applies. So the challenge I have for the new generation or for the organizers, as you see, their hashtag says, "We are the future." I believe that your hashtag should be, "We are the present." And I think you should help us. I challenge you to help us find those solutions. Lastly, I typically like to finish with a quote. And normally I quote somebody insightful, somebody famous, somebody that may not have lived, that may have lived in a different century. But I heard something the other night that I wanted to quote here today, and unfortunately that person is not here. But the chair of the Young Professionals Committee said something very insightful the other day, and so that's my challenge. What he said at the opening ceremony was, "We have ideas, we have the mindset. Who if not us, when if not now?" So that is my challenge to the future leaders of the oil and gas industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerardo, for this presentation. I think it's really important to have somebody from an association that can give a little bit the big picture and to realize that there is a lot of companies involved in this, and this is a reality that several companies around the world are really contributing to this challenge. And I would like to ask you, especially you were mentioning like the environmental partnership, and you said like there's a collaborative effort. And as you say, we are the future, you are the present. I would like to ask you, like, how do you think that young professionals and students can have like a distinct contribution to this global effort?
Thank you, Lara. I think there are many ways. Some of the things that I think getting involved in organizations such as the World Petroleum Congress or Council is one way of doing that. But also I think we need to be mentors. You guys, the current young generation in our industry has to be mentors to not only us, but also to the next generation. The other thing that comes to mind is I believe that all of us in general tend to receive their news and sources of information from very specific areas. I think we need to open up our minds a little bit more and not just listen to one newscast or podcast, but to open it up a little bit and become more engaged. So those are a couple of ways that come to mind right away, but also ask. I think that one thing that I saw here this week is the passion that you guys have. So you're already coming up with solutions. you also have a wealth of knowledge around you. So engage everybody.
Thank you very much. I really like your quote because I really think it's impossible to make something big without passion. So we are really passionate about this industry, and it's true that maybe we only lack a little bit of spreading the voice to other people. So it's now my pleasure to introduce you to Marta Borgstein. She's the leader of Corporate Sustainability and Communications at Equinor. Thank you.
Like this? Yeah. So thank you, Laura, and thank you, fellow panelists. Great being here today, and great to see that this topic is also being on the top of the agenda here, like it is in the rest of the world and outside our industry. I believe we have a significant role to play in tackling this challenge as an industry, but as individuals and human beings, part of a society and part of a common future. If we want to be an industry for the future, it's not a question of whether we have a role, but it's a question of whether we can turn one of the greatest challenges of our time into business opportunities. Can we do well while doing good? Oops. So Laura, this slide is for your introduction, really. It's one way of seeing the realities. Another way is, of course, also addressing the need for fossil fuels in the future. But this, that there is a limit to what the planet can take, is what the surroundings, our context, is debating. Sustainability is not only a matter of being a do-gooder. This is a business matter. The increased pressure and higher expectations are not only coming from the activists, but it's also coming from investors, from young people like us, from the decision makers. Climate change is a dominating issue, but we're also facing higher expectations to our response on other issues, social issues, environmental issues, and the question of what kind of role we as business want to have and need to have to be part of a society. Not taking action is not sustainable for people, it's not sustainable for the planet, and it's not sustainable for the business. It represents risk for litigation, for bad regulations, for not attracting the talent we need, the capital we need. Our industry is at the core of this change. So, I work in Equinor. Maybe you know us better as Statoil. We changed our name last year to better support our strategy, always safe, high value, and low carbon. And we are mindful about the upside of this challenge and this energy transition that is needed. We believe companies that are finding solutions are also going to be the companies that attract the best talent. We're guided by our values and inspired by our purpose when we aim to contribute to shape the future of energy. Our climate roadmap is our plan to develop a low-carbon business advantage. So this is our toolbox. It's a forward-leaning action plan to support the ambitions of the Paris Agreement. First, we believe that oil and gas will still be needed in the future energy mix. But it matters what kind of fossil fuels we extract. We need to produce it with the lowest emissions as possible. Equinor is one of the world's most carbon-efficient oil and gas producers, and our methane intensity is about 1/10 of the industry average. The targets we've set will help us to further improve our operations. We've also set clear principles for how to improve our future portfolio, how to shape the future oil and gas. For instance, carbon pricing, already mentioned here today, we apply a price of $55 per ton for all investment analysis in all markets. We support the price on carbon, and we believe it's an efficient and important measure to drive the competitiveness of cleaner fuels. So, we're also growing in new energy solutions. To us, it makes sense industrially because we have a very strong safety culture, we have the capabilities to deliver large projects, and we have a continuous focus on technology and innovation. Of course, it also makes sense financially because it diversifies our portfolio, it has an acceptable risk profile, and we see potential for profit. Today, Equinor delivers wind power to more than 1 million European households. In 2018, we invested 4% of around $10 billion in renewables. In 2030, we expect to increase to 15 to 20%. We're also focusing on decarbonization technologies to keep the competitiveness of oil and gas. This includes CCS, carbon capture and storage, also utilization and hydrogen value chains. These solutions can help also reduce the emissions from the use of our products. In Equinor, we already capture and stored about 23 million tons of CO2, but we need to find a business model that makes it commercially viable. So that's what we're working on right now. We promote transparency, and we've done so since the very start, almost 50 years ago. And reporting is an important measure. High-quality reporting represents important insights into a company's strategy, governance, and performance. And to us, it's a way to show how we continuously improve. From an investor perspective, sustainability, or ESG data, is increasingly being used in traditional valuation models and investment decisions. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it's financially compelling. Finally, we need to collaborate to get all of this right. We don't think there is any part or perspective, institution in society that can make this needed transition happen alone. We've teamed up with peers in the oil and gas climate initiative to help shape the industry's response and spur technology development. We collaborate with our suppliers to reduce the emissions from maritime operations. We support innovation through corporate venturing and accelerator programs. To complement our climate roadmap, we're also ready to invest in natural sinks, in the protection of tropical forests, a much-needed natural climate solution. Since 2017, that was actually when I started in working in the corporate sustainability unit. We have delivered on our targets, our promises. But when the context is changing, so must we. Aligned with the expectations expressed by many of our shareholders, we are now deepening our commitments. We are including longer-term climate ambitions and the approach to Scope 3 in an updated climate roadmap that will launch next year. Through these new steps, we hope to inspire and to demonstrate even stronger support for the Paris Agreement. The easy way of putting it is that we need more renewable and less fossil fuels. And we need to implement small and big technologies for carbon removal. Let's set our targets before others decide them for us. And let's promote the market transformations and be ready to supply the energy demand of tomorrow. Let's make the industry response about actions rather than words. And let's show both contributors and critics how we make this challenge into a business opportunity and what the responsible, innovative, and important sector we represent looks like at its best. There are quite some good initiatives and actions from across our industry now, and I hope we can inspire each other to do more, both together and individually. To me, this is a healthy competition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta, for your presentation. I think it's good that we are hearing in all your presentations that there is a toolkit, doesn't it? Like there is not like just one silver bullet to solve this challenge, and we really have to contribute all the energies, all the technologies, and all our efforts to really transition and change. And I mean, you are really an example of company that was the first one, like leading the way and changing and transforming even the name to this energy transition. So you mentioned also that you are willing to inspire. So how do you think that young professionals can really inspire and influence their companies as insiders to lead this transformation? I mean, you have the example of your company, so which was the distinctive role of young professionals in Equinor?
Thank you, Laura. Well, I don't think there is one single solution, but for young people and leaders, employees, I think we need to help also our senior management understand what this challenge is about. From our perspective, sometimes we are very mindful of the need for fossil fuels also in the future. We're talking a lot about the dilemma. But for many outside our industry, particularly young people, this is not a dilemma. This is a crisis that they and we need to solve. So I think we need to help also our colleagues to understand the debate and to understand what this can actually mean for our companies, for our license to operate, for instance. And I think we need to help get the top management interest and dedication. We won't change probably until we have a target and a KPI and until we measure the performance.
Thank you very much. I think it's important, your point of education, because in fact, as from the Young Professionals Committee, we have a survey to try to know the perception of the oil and gas industry from outsiders, and you really realize how we have a huge challenge on communicating like the society outside the oil and gas industry, how we contribute that the oil and gas is not only in their cars, but also in their computers, in their fancy iPhones, and all the things that basically that they touch. So thank you very much for your point. So we will continue with our last speaker, but not least, that is Michael Collins. He's the CEO of Salim Petroleum Development. Okay, let's give him an applause, please.
Colleagues, good afternoon. To organizers, participants, and to my esteemed colleagues, it's really a privilege to be here today. I would like to share perhaps the movement to action. In the flow of the conversation today, we've covered a global perspective, portfolio perspective, industry associations. I'd like to share the experience of an oil company in Russia and the move to action. So we are a joint venture between two international entities, Gazprom-Neft, extremely progressive part of the Russian landscape, and Shell, an integrated international energy company. both of our shareholders have created a strong statement of portfolios related to transition of our energy systems. And we are part of that portfolio. Salim Petroleum is in Western Siberia. Established in 2000 and late 90s and first oil in 2004, we have a number of licenses operating, and we are an oil company. When I say that, we're actually a water company. And we'll come back to that and what it means for our role in the climate challenge. With 2.6% of the overall regional production and around about only 1% of the Russian production, it can be argued, what impact can small companies have? How can we move the needle on elements of the climate change crisis? On the bottom right is the overall production profile for our company. And overlaid on it is the water production. Water inside our hydrocarbon systems contributes to the most significant portion of our energy consumption. Energy, which is fueled from hydrocarbons. Energy, which is used in our overall industry to drive production. It's important to recognize that right across the industry, water drives our challenge. Now, we see our role in climate change as part of our corporate social responsibility. It's part of our role in the society. It's part of our role in being a good neighbor. We have a program which is integrating key elements of safety, benefits in our community, social performance, our role with Indigenous people, and of course our environmental footprint. And it's certainly part of our environmental footprint where we look for some of the key elements that work towards the climate challenge. No flaring, as we shared from my colleagues. Leak detection, removing unwanted soot from distribution of flaring systems in not only our own, but our associated facilities. We also make sure we execute rigorous and a lot of studies into how we impact the environment around us in our licenses. And we have targets, as was mentioned, setting an ambitious goal around how we are going to have an impact on certainly energy efficiency. The top left really shows the challenge for small companies like Salim Petroleum. The biggest parts of our energy intensity come from pumping oil and gas through our submersible pumps. Indeed, transporting it and injection of that water into the system. And the last part is actually the processing and transportation. Impacting our energy efficiency is not just an economic case, but it's a strong case to our responsibility to improve efficiency. Now, we have had an energy efficiency program for some time, and on the bottom left, you can see how much we have saved in terms of driving a reduction in the energy we consume. And I think there's some real practical cases here for us to share and be working across the industry to achieve. Changing out the majority of our artificial lift systems to more efficient pumps has had a dramatic impact on the overall efficiency of our system. This has come at a cost, of course, but the impact it's had over the long term has created a strong economic case for action. We've also been working on really being efficient with our water injection systems, as well as making sure we reduce our flaring and greenhouse gas emissions from any leaks. As was mentioned, there is extensive technology out there, and ones that we do use, whether it be drones or LiDAR, or indeed overall leak detection and minimization by removing leak points through design and in maintenance. So splitting maybe the challenge in half, we've talked a little bit about energy efficiency, practical examples of where we've been able to reduce the amount of energy we consume with a direct impact on the amount of greenhouse gas that we take from the grids. Overall greenhouse gas reduction actions have allowed us to stay a little bit of the challenge of increased water production, but it is inevitable. What we can say is that we've had a number of successes. Early on in the field's history, we were able to work with a third party to create a relationship where associated gas is used for local power generation and indeed LPG production. This diversifies the value chain, but it also resulted in an immediate reduction in flaring. We've made modifications to our system related to the way that it operates to reduce the amount of flaring, once again, with a significant impact on CO2 equivalent emissions. I mentioned those pump changes, and over the last couple of years, we've been able to have an impact. Just this year, we're able to work with suppliers. These are suppliers of our power generation system to modify the fuel mixes to have an impact on the amount of lean gas we consume and therefore be more efficient in the amount of CO2 produced from our power generation systems. The case for action is clear, and these small but meaningful efforts are part of our responsibility. Now, it doesn't end there. The actions must continue. There are diminishing returns now, but not ones that we don't face together with our own employees and with our suppliers. So we have actions ahead, and we have a direction to go. Overall, we're going to see that our energy intensity does increase because the amount of water that we're going to be producing as a small energy company in Russia will increase. Doesn't mean we stand still. So we're going to work with Ugra State University and a number of other institutions, indeed, at looking at what is the natural sink performance of the region in which we work. This is the first stage. It's not been done before in the area we operate. And so it's a bit of a pace setter that we're hoping to work with universities on. And we do hope that in a second stage that we can continue to look at some full-scale measurements of the natural abatement opportunities in our region. I think reflecting on what one of my colleagues also said, there is still a gap that can be filled with innovation. Finding solutions in small energy companies like ours means technology. It means people with new ideas who are passionate to look for ways of reducing emissions on the ground in operating assets. So I think to complement the story that we've had through the day, the global challenge is clear. The case for energy is clear. The case for cleaner energy is clear. How do we move to action? And I think by assembling the examples and best practices we see from right round the industry, we may be able to have a true impact on what happens today and tomorrow and in the future. But it will take the imagination of new professionals, making sure that we bring that passion and energy into every company which is operating across our industry. We don't have to wait. So, colleagues, I think as we conclude this short presentation, the case for action is clear. How can we mobilize ourselves and the best practices from right round the industry to have an impact? These are the decisions that we can make inside SPD, and we're proud to continue making. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Michael, and also for making people aware that we are increasingly setting KPIs in our companies, as Martha was mentioning, that is really the call to action and the movement that we should follow. But please let me ask you something a little bit different, not that related with our KPIs, because we were mentioning before, you have been living really around the world. And one thing I always think to me when we talk about energy transition, it's the different realities that we can find around the world. I'm European, and sometimes Europeans tend to think that their energy reality is the reality that we can find in all the world, but it's not like that. So what is your view on the different energy transition realities?
No, thank you, Laura. It's indeed, I think I've been fortunate to be able to work around the world, from developing nations to established nations, to industry leaders and in ventures starting in new countries. I guess my experience of it is the one of dilemmas on the ground. The case for energy transition is so clear, but how do we translate that to a jeepney driver in the Philippines, or to an economy trying to develop itself to create education, to provide cooking, clean cooking energy, to provide medical care? This is the true challenge on the ground. But I think there is this very important phase of moving to practical action. And certainly within SPD, that's a choice we said that we would take. We wouldn't see ourselves as a corner of the portfolio of our shareholders. We would take action with meaningful projects that we could control. I think it's part of a debate, as my colleague shared, that has to be had in every company and in every corporation. And it's part of what I think young leaders can do and should do, which is create the energy for that action, the expectation of an energy efficiency plan, the expectation of information and transparency. But we should never forget that in the end, the case for energy remains extremely strong in the world to help move development. Doing that sustainably is not an easy thing to do.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. Before giving the floor to the audience that are the important ones here, and we really want to hear their questions, I would like to make a final one, because I think today this panel is more important than 1 year before, because we just knew that during last year, it was the year where the emissions grew by 1.7%, and it was the first year growing emissions after 3 years of stabilizing. And the reality was that it was the biggest increase since 2013. So it means that even if we are setting up measures, we are not doing enough as an industry, or maybe it's that there is a reality that the consumer has to play a role here. Because there is a curious fact that we were discussing before, that is that the reality is that 2/3 of that emissions increase came from the power generation. And that power generation came from the extreme temperatures that we were experiencing in the world. So more people were turning on their AC, more people was turning on their heat, and it means that everybody wants to fight climate change, but then we also want to be warm in our houses, we want to have our AC on. So how is your view on the real contribution also of the other players here that are really we, consumers? I don't know, it's an open question. Who wants to take the floor?
Yeah, I can try. I think it's a very important topic or part of the discussion, because I don't think there is one part of the society alone that can solve this. We also see interesting products developing, such as offsets. You can perhaps buy your way to having a carbon neutral flight. So I think it's interesting, and of course quotas in the European Union, for instance, is really important also in driving down the emissions. But it's important to be mindful of, I think, that if we want to change this, to really change this, everyone has to change their lifestyle. We have to live differently, consume less. So I don't think we will be able to succeed only by measures, invented to kind of improve. I think they really need to change how we. It's an interesting development right now as well. For instance, you see in Sweden, their new word of the year was fly shame. So shame of flying was voted the new word of 2019. That's not something that is very, perhaps, high on every country's agenda, but that it's there, it's also says something about the debate.
Really interesting. Some other thoughts, or we open the discussion to the audience? Okay, so Do we have questions in the audience? Okay, there, please. Okay, first, ladies first.
Hello, I have a question especially to Marta. In your presentation, it was stated that in the roadmap that Equinor wants to put a price on carbon. I know that Equinor is a company in Norway, participates in the quota scheme, and in addition to that, also pays a very high CO2 tax, which is the highest in Norway, and probably it is the highest in the world. So altogether, to cost about 100 euro for Equinor. So my question is the following: do you consider that as a high enough price? Does it reflect the social cost of carbon? And the second part of the same question: do you think that carbon taxation and such a high price is a good instrument to reduce CO2 cost, CO2 in total CO2 emissions? Thank you.
Thanks for your question. I didn't hear everything perfectly, but I'll try to answer as far as I understood it. So you're asking about the price of carbon and the level that we think is the right one. Well, that's a good question. And as far as I know, it's probably not going to be the same price in every market, because markets are different, right? So since the early 90s, we've paid a price on carbon for about 80% of all our production. It wasn't, easy at first, but of course it encourages you as a company to do things differently, to improve, to design your operations differently, and we know it works. So like you said, yes, in Europe right now it's a high price. And whether it's the right price, it's a good question too. Where we are today, I think the price is it's meaningful, because you also see that the prices for electricity goes up. So it becomes also more expensive to pollute as a consumer. And in the Norwegian market, it has, as far as I know, it's not too high either. But of course, if we look at science and the IPCC report, for instance, we're expecting the carbon price to increase significantly over the next years, decades.
Here we have another question.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. My question for the second speaker, you said about the carbon dioxide emission, and you said that natural gas is more effective for the production of electricity and more clean and more safe. Why now we see that more countries in the world interested in building a new nuclear power station for the generation of electricity? Why them they doesn't use natural gas for producing electricity in place nuclear power station? Thank you.
Your point was, just to understand properly, because the sound here is a little bit bad, like your question was like, which is the incentive of construction of a natural gas plant versus?
My question, why many countries in the world nowadays build a new nuclear power station more than in the last? He said that natural gas is more effective and more safe in the production and generation of electrical energy. Why we see now that more countries interested in building a new nuclear power station? You think that is political? What is the reason there?
Yeah, so the point is why they are increasing the number of
Thank you.
Okay, I think I understood the question. So, from my perspective, from our perspective, we believe in all sources of energy. So I'm not advocating one against another, but through the development of newer technologies and innovation over the last 15 years, mainly in the United States, and now that's being exported and utilized in other places of the world, through hydraulic fracturing and directional drilling, we have been able to unlock tight gas, or gas that before was not as easily extracted from the ground. And through the enhancement of those technologies, we have also been able to produce more in a more sustainable way. Some of the things that we didn't talk about, or I didn't talk about, was, for example, the recycle of water usage. So 15 years ago, we might have used a lot of water, keeping with the topic of climate change here. Now, we've been able to figure out better ways of doing it. We've also been able to improve some of those technologies, not just for the fracturing and the directional drilling, but the well construction, to make sure that the communities are safe and that there's no contamination of the water sources. But to your question then, so there's an abundance of natural gas. So, and also the production or the generation of energy is also cleaner through lower emissions. And also is much more economically. So countries are much more interested in securing natural gas from those sources that where it's available, while other countries develop their gas developments.
Thank you.
More questions from the audience? We don't have more questions? Okay, there.
So thank you all for your presentations. This is an open question to whoever wants to answer. Since we're talking about climate change, the main driver are greenhouse gases. And we need to increase the amount of renewable energy sources in order to get greenhouse gas emissions down. But, so I sort of have two questions. One is if you want to come with your thoughts on some of the most promising renewable energy sources in your opinion, and also some of the more problematic aspects of these new renewable energy sources. For example, for those of you who are from Norway in the panel, you know that the last few weeks we have had quite a discussion of wind power, a big fight against wind power on one of our islands. So again, the question is the most promising renewable source, and also what are some of the big challenges about these renewable sources? Thank you.
Okay, I'll go first then, since I'm from Norway at least. So yeah, it's good questions. I think in terms of the promising renewable sources, we need an array and all of those are interesting, obviously, but what we see is that there are some technologies that we can develop now without subsidies. So that is, you know, what is most interesting today, and we've gotten there on, for instance, offshore wind on fixed, not floating. And to your other question, the downsides. Well, in Norway, just to bring a bit more to that for the rest of the audience, it's mainly a debate about land-based wind farms. which can be annoying. It can be, you don't want to have it in your backyard. You would rather like to see free, open air. We worry about the eagles. We worry about other birds. And that was actually in an article I read today in the New York Times as well. It's the same debate in the US, outside of New York, for instance, where we're also hoping to be able to develop offshore wind. So I don't think we'll ever find perfect in every way. But of course, for each and every project, either it's oil, gas, renewable, we need to do the same, have the same diligent approach to environmental and social issues, do the same analysis and studies before we start building anything. We have to understand where we are to be able to coexist with nature and other businesses, like we've done for so long, also in Norway, offshore, with fisheries, with the environment, etc. But I think, if we see a 4-degree rise in temperatures, I'm not sure if there's going to be so many birds to consider. So I don't think it's going to be perfect and easy, but I'm sure that we will find a way to coexist also within renewable.
I think we also have some way to go on technical innovations with a lot of these technologies to improve how we go forward. We are sadly, though, in a lot of cases, still limited by the laws of thermodynamics. So there are still limits with some of these things. Solar panels have increased in efficiency greatly over the years, and the ones certainly has been a big push in Europe for solar panels, but the current panels probably have an efficiency of about 30–35%. Now, there's some innovations with nanotechnology and things, but with the laws of thermodynamics, the maximum you can get for fixed panels is 55%. If you have movable panels, then you can get up to 80%, but there are still limits, and like was just said, most of the problems, again, particularly in the UK, for example, is the not in my backyard. Everybody wants more windmills, they want more solar panels, but they don't want to be able to look at them, which is a problem. With wind power, they certainly found in the UK there are problems again with birds, and also with concentrated areas of windmills, also interference with radar and communications as well, which is quite interesting. Well, not here to damn the renewable side of things, but I think that the big challenge for us is to, particularly because just of the sheer scale of energy we're going to need in the future, we have to use fossil fuels, and by doing that we have to use carbon capture and storage and/or utilization to go forward.
Maybe I can share when SPD was forging the latest view of its energy plan, we decided to open the box and say, well, what if you were to look at Western Siberia for renewables? And I can assure you there were parts of my company that went, are you kidding? But it is worth asking the question, I think, in each company about what is the realities, because it's moving so fast. Whether it be the cost of installation, whether it be the performance, whether it be the technical boundaries in each environment, in each setting. And although when we screened our little portfolio for solar, wind, and CCS, we couldn't find an economic case, it doesn't mean we won't stop looking, because it does move very fast. I think the fault would be to stop watching it and making assumptions that it doesn't fit. And that's perhaps the challenge for us as an industry.
Do we have other questions? Okay, so I will do the final question before the closing remarks. And the question is for Michael. I'm curious, if, and maybe for Marta from the corporate perspective, do you really see that the climate change policies or regulations are impacting your ability to access capital or to financing your companies?
So I think I can share from being in a position where we have two shareholders that it is an expectation of investors. And while I don't have public investors, I have two private investors who expect all of their entities to develop progressive strategies on a whole bunch of issues, safety and performance, and et cetera, and energy efficiency and overall greenhouse gas emission intensity is one of them. And I think that it was referenced by one of my colleagues, if it's not on the agenda of boards, if it's not on the agenda of management teams, I think that's where we have a flaw. As to whether it's inhibiting investment, I think, you know, for small entities or private entities, it plays out differently. But it's definitely a debate going on around the world, whether it be in private equity funding, whether it be in the expectations of banks and intergovernmentals. It is playing a role. Norwegian Pension Fund famously made moves related to the topic, and other sovereign wealth funds right around the world. So yes, it's having an impact, but I think the challenge for all CEOs, management teams, and boards is make sure it's an agenda.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I think this is also a matter of, you know, what you see first, what will materialize first. Is it a higher cost of capital, or do you as a company manage to adjust so you won't be in that situation? So yeah, I think the development we're seeing in the capital markets are very real. Now it's no longer ESG and sustainability. Of course, the material topics for companies are no longer something that is that is being disregarded. And you know, it's really, we see it being implemented and mainstreamed to a large degree, actually. And it's just the last couple of years. It's really part of most of the conversations. So yeah, let's see. But I hope, but I think it's a very positive signal that also capital markets are rewarding a high sustainability performance.
Thank you very much, Michael and Marta. Okay, so we will go for, if we don't have more questions from the audience, okay, so we will go with the final remarks. Thank you very much all for being here today. Thank you very much to our panelists. I think it was really interesting, like starting from Piers, how he open our eyes and make us see how the energy industry at the very beginning wasn't like in the center of the discussion and we were like apart, how increasingly we took like the central role and we really have a role to play, and how Gerardo, he explained several initiatives that all across our industry, several companies like in a joint effort, they are developing. And of course, the example of Marta and Michael, how in companies they are really setting like KPIs and how is climate change an increasing relevant topic that is in all the agendas, not only for strategy but also for financing. But before closing, I would like you to close with one sentence. We also address the role of technology, and that there is not a silver bullet, and we need really a toolkit. So in a brief sentence for you, which is the most relevant part of this toolkit to address climate change, and if the young professionals and students that are here can really push that in some extent.
Also, I hope there's a message which is have curiosity, have a voice, and move to action.
Okay, hard one sentence. I hope that you as young and future leaders will inspire and support each other, and try to bring all of your colleagues along, no matter where they're working in the company, that being oil or gas, renewables. Everyone in the company can play a role in improving.
Thanks again, Laura. So it was interesting that the three of us, or maybe the four of us, mentioned take action, or so I picked that up on the conversations. So in one phrase, I would summarize it as leadership, collaboration, and take action.
And as part of what Geraldo said, I think you, without the danger of getting sacked, challenge whatever you can within the company that you're working with.
Thank you very much, inspiring words. So, young leaders, take action. Thank you very much for coming. And now we wait for a small